It is June 2020 and there is a lot of talk in this country about ending the racial discrimination. Black Lives Matter movement has unprecedented support of the masses. As a social scientist, I thought, how can I contribute? So in this video, I will tell you about 3 iconic experiments about race and prejudice in this country. Some of them changed the history as we know it, and some of them just revealed a lot about how we as humans view prejudice and race here in the United States. I'm Sidorova. This is my show Think Tank. So without any further ado, let's dive in. So the first experiment that I wanted to talk to you about is the famous doll experiment. So researchers back in the 40s and the 50s, there were 2 famous researchers that did that. They came to a school or kindergarten and they asked black kids to pick whether they like a black doll or a white doll. And the reason that they did it, they wanted to kind of figure out what's the self-esteem of the black kids versus white kids. And so what they found out that a lot of black kids actually chose the white doll, and they were fascinated about it. And they decided that I guess means that, black kids have low self-esteem. And that experiment actually helped for this 1954 famous Supreme Court case that ended segregation in schools. So I find that pretty fascinating. But the experiment itself was later debunked because they failed to control for things like demographics, like socioeconomic status of the kids, their age, whether the interviewer was black or white, which matters a lot. And then they were just finding other problems with that experiment. But overall, this was a cool way of kind of testing of how those kids feel about themselves. Because if you just ask them, what is your self-esteem? Kids will never tell you, they're too young, and it's revealed preferences. People actually don't know how they feel about themselves just by telling other people.
Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? And which doll is the bad doll?
The second iconic experiment was the welfare queen experiment. So the welfare queen term is often attributed to Reagan. He never actually used the term, but he kind of described this prototypical woman who is scamming the government to get the welfare. So, and that was actually a living and breathing woman, Linda Taylor, who had a pretty tragic story, and she was kind of the prototype of that. So what they did in that experiment, it was in the 1990s, so much later. They used a news story, a welfare story that they created specifically for the experiment, and they got quite a few participants, and they split them in 4 groups, and they changed the race of the welfare recipient. So for the participant in group 1, the welfare recipient was black. For the second group, the welfare recipient was white. For the third group, there was no welfare recipient image, and for the fourth group, they weren't even listening a story. They were not watching a story about welfare. They had some other story. So, and they wanted to see how kind of racial preferences change after people view the story. And so after they viewed the story, they asked them a bunch of questions about welfare, about how they perceive African Americans, what they think about women gender roles, and things like that. So what they found out is that when people see a story with the welfare recipient as black, they tend to be more prejudiced towards blacks and less accepting of welfare in general. But when they see a welfare story with a white woman, they actually then are even more negative towards black, because what researchers kind of say is that maybe it's because they blame blacks for kind of the plight of their white peers. When they were asked about gender roles, people were more upset with the white woman getting welfare than the black woman getting welfare. And then what these authors say is that it may be because they just don't even hold black women to the same standard as they're holding to the white woman to. But I don't know why. It's just a speculation on the behalf of the authors. But that experiment, the big picture is that it tells us a lot that if media or Hollywood is portraying blacks in a certain way, then it changes how we see them. in daily life. And I find that kind of crazy and fascinating. You know, for years I've been watching Hollywood movies back in Russia. You know, they were portraying black people and Russians and people of color just so negatively, and then it's just, I keep thinking, is my kind of understanding of the world just shaped by those stereotypes? It might be. And you know, the funny thing is actually that you can check how biased are you towards blacks using the implicit association test, and I can do a whole video on that. That's a fascinating test. You can just go online and check your level of prejudice if you're interested. I encourage you to do that. That's a fascinating experiment. The only criticism of that test is that sometimes some of my friends who took it, they said that it gives you a little bit of a different result time to time. And because it's like such a split-second decision, it depends on how you felt on the day, because your cognitive functioning is different day to day just based on how you feel overall, like how your health is basically. And so the third experiment is another fascinating one. That's quite a recent experiment. I think it was done in the past 10 years or so. So what they wanted to find out is expectations of multiracial friendships. So multiracial friendships, they are important because they lower the level of prejudice of people, but those multiracial friendships, they're not common, and they also decline with age. So what the authors did was that they took white, black, and mixed kids and adults, and they asked them a bunch of questions about their expectations. They saw that most people expect black kids to have black friends and white kids to have white friends. But for mixed kids, the results were different. So mixed kids expected mixed kids to have mostly white friends, whereas adults expected mixed kids to have mostly black friends. So I think that tells you a lot on what you think of yourself and what you expect of yourself versus what the society expects of you. Just based on your color. Yeah, so those are the three fascinating studies about race and prejudice in America. And what do you guys think? Do you think those are fascinating studies too? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you do the IAT test, the implicit association test, please let me comment down below. Let me know what you thought, what your experience was. And also subscribe to my channel because it gives me incredible motivation to create. I am going to be putting another video about framing and priming. Some of the things that we talked about in this video I alluded to because the welfare queen experiment was an example of priming. I'm going to be putting a video about that in a couple of weeks, so subscribe and stay tuned for that. Until next time, just follow me on Instagram so we could be friends in the real life. Till next time, bye.